in Makot. We are right at the end of this tractate, and in fact, at the top of the class, I will give this information at the end too, because there are always people streaming in. We will have a siyum to celebrate the tractate on Monday at noon Eastern, and I will put that information into the chat shortly and share it again at the end of the session. But in the meantime, let me say welcome. My name is Rachel Scheinerman. I edit the Daily Dose of Talmud in My Jewish Learning. And this, of course, is our 30-minute exploration of some things we saw in the Daf this week in Tractate Makot, which, boy, was a quick one, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful teachers who come to teach this class. And on this particular Thursday, we're joined by Rabbi Ari. So Rabbi Sachs, go ahead and get us started.
Sure. First off, I have to begin with a just a moment of asking for forgiveness for everyone. There was a couple of weekends ago in which we had to cancel class. That was on my end because I had something that came up at the last minute that I wasn't able to get out of. And so for all that, I want to say chatati, pashati. I hope that you can forgive me and slachli, and something I will be atoning for at Yom Kippur. Perhaps you may even consider giving me lashes, which is appropriate for this particular tractate of Makot. And I know that in terms of the actual Daf Yomi set, we are finishing up with Makot 23 is from today, and then Makot actually goes all the way to page to 24. So a question for Rachel. Rachel, since we're having a siyum, you said this Monday?
Yes.
Would you want to offer a bracha for the end of studying this chapter, even though we're one page away, or are you going to save that for that siyum?
Well, tomorrow we finish, so let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's enjoy these last few pages, and we will have a chance to celebrate on Monday.
Fair enough. So I'm very excited to be with everyone here today. The text that we're actually going to be using, I'm actually going to be sharing a PowerPoint that I kind of created for this section because I wanted to also do one other thing in terms of my own kind of growth with the learning here. Is that there was one comment I remember actually I just saw had seen in the chat a little while ago, that not a while ago, but the last time that I was here, about sort of the difference between, let's say, bikiyut, which is to be able to go through the entire set of learning, all the 7 days, compared to going on a deeper level. And one of the things I just want to share with that is how, 1 second, just fix this, is that the way in which I was trained, especially at the Jewish Theological Seminary, is to really do a deep dive into the text, to do the depth of the text. And yet also, in terms of doing the bikiyut, in terms of doing the breath, there is value to doing that as well, to be able to make sure you cover as much as possible, but you can't always do that, especially in a half hour. So I'm trying something a little bit different here to be able to give at least a little bit more of the breadth of the actual text in a way that personally I find to be a little bit fun and with something that could be done in the context of a half hour that we have here. So does everybody see where it says Daf Yomi Makot 17 to 23 on the screen? Can you give me a thumbs up if you see it? Just make sure. Great. So during the siyum for completing all of or the celebration of our learning, I forget which tractate I did, but I did the top 10 sayings from that particular tractate. I think it was Shabbat, that had nothing to do with Shabbat. So here, I want to actually offer a top 7 for 7. These are going to be, it's a little bit different, 7 memorable quotes, one for each daf of this past week. So, first one, ants for dinner. In Makot 17a, Rabbi Shimon said to them, "Do you not concede to me with regard to one who eats an ant of any size, that he is liable to receive lashes?" It has nothing to do with ants per se, has to do with the actual size of food in which if you eat of that untithed produce of that size, you're liable for lashes. I just think it's funny that the rabbis are considering actually having a diet full of insects like ants. I mean, then we can eat as much as we can because there's so many ants in the world. Makot 18b. This to me is duh. Rava raises an objection that you may eat, but there's not any other animal that you may eat. It says in that particular verse that it's referring to of all the different kosher animals and that you may not eat anything else. And then Rabbi Shimon's like, well, of course, you're only allowed to eat those kosher animals. And yet the Torah comes with the next verse to say that here are the other animals that you're not allowed to eat. And then it begins a bit of a discussion about what is appropriate to eat or what is not appropriate to eat. And then this is one of my favorites. Did they just actually make up a word? A certain elder taught them, as the place is too far from you, mimecha, or actually it's really mimcha, from Deuteronomy 14 to 24, and the term is interpreted as from your fullness, lu acha. Now, it's referring specifically to where the untithed produce is either in the city or outside of the city. If it's in the city, depending upon where it is, that will determine if you are liable for lashes if you had not yet offered them before you ate them. And yet, the question there is about, well, if you're partially, like your physical body is inside the city and you are eating outside the city, does that actually make a difference? And I'm almost thinking like, I love hockey. And one of the interesting things about hockey is who is onside or offside, and it depends on where you are on the actual line, the blue line, and you have to be a little bit over the blue line, or you have to be a little bit in the neutral zone, and you're fine. But if you're all the way outside, then you're not fine. Then you're actually offsides, and it just gave that sense of your part of your body is inside or outside the city. And then the fact is that the word mimacha versus mimi luacha, those words do not mix. They're not actual same words. And yet the rabbis are trying to figure out how to answer specific questions that come up in their discussion about whether or not one is liable to receive lashes. And they go to all of these depths to figure out even where your body is. So that's for Daf 19. Then you go to Makot 20b, go bald or go home. Lekorcha shtayim, for a bald spot, the measure is 2 hairs. You're not supposed to cut your hair. And so therefore, if you become bald by cutting it in some way, then you're liable for lashes. And all I can say is, for all the balded men out there, I guess I'm going to have so many lashes because, man, I really wish that the baldness would actually just go away. Although there is another text in Torah that says that if you become bald, then in fact, you become holy and pure. So I'm going to go with that one and not with this one. Makot 21a. And I wonder if we have any doctors here who can help with this one. An incision is cut by hand, i.e. with one's fingernails, while a laceration is cut with a utensil. And here it's talking about the extent to which if you cut your body similar to the baldness, if you are liable for lashes. And I just think that the fact that there's a difference between an incision versus a laceration. I mean, if an incision, thinking about an actual surgery being done, and versus a laceration is something that you do because you have let's say, cut yourself in some sort of way that is not okay. And so the fact that they're actually determining the definition of incision of a laceration based upon the utensil that's used and that it's referred to as a fingernail, I just found that to be fascinating and wonder if any doctors have any takes or any surgeons have any takes in the comments below. And then from Makot 22b, with friends like these, and one shall say to him, what are these wounds between your arms? Then he shall answer, those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. That's right. You go to the house of your friends, and what do? You come out with some kind of wound in your body. So the fact is that if you have friends like that, then you don't even need any enemies because, I don't know, you should not go over there for for a celebration, even if it's to watch the Stanley Cup Finals, because you're just going to get hurt. Finally, Makot 23a, things rabbis should not say from the bima. Now, I have not had the experience of having to be up on the bima and to try to, let me back up for a second. I've been on the bima trying to figure out how to be able to encourage my congregation to engage more with mitzvot, but I would never say this. And Rav Sheshet says, anyone who treats the festivals with contempt, it is as though he is worshiping idols. I can almost imagine it's like, if you don't come to shul on the holiday, well, I have a connection to God and God's going to come and get you. So these are just things that if you're a rabbi, if you want to be a rabbi, do not say it on the bima. It may be that idea of trying to ensure that you're celebrating the festivals, but still, I think that it's not necessarily something that should be done. So I just shared these 7 different sayings because in studying the text from this past week, I found them to be interesting, funny, engaging, something that you could be able to bring up at a cocktail hour as something that's just, I don't know, I think kind of fun. So those are my top 7 for 7, a little bit of the breadth of this particular section of Makot. But now I want to kind of focus my time much more on going deeper into the text. And this,
before
yes.
you continue, we're getting some requests. Is this like a Google slide? Can we share it in the chat as well so people can open it in a separate window on there?
Unfortunately, it is not, because PowerPoint is just a little bit different. So unfortunately, I cannot say that.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But I'm happy to send it to you if you want, or send it to anyone else if they want.
Okay, so if you send it to me, we will send it with a follow-up email after this class.
Great.
And you can open it then.
Sounds good. So the one of the things that, as I mentioned before, in terms of my learning, especially at the Jewish Theological Seminary, is the importance of going deeper into the text and of also asking questions related to how did the text come to us? So, because if we are reading something on the page, we expect it to relate the truth of what it was that the author was saying. But if you're reading a text that has been redacted, amended, edited over the course of 6, 7, 8 centuries, well, there's a lot of times in which the text that you see on the page does not actually represent the conversations that occurred behind the scenes. And so one of the things that we learned in school was to really take a critical eye to some of the passages in the text that if you just read the Rashi, you can find a way to kind of get through it. But if you take another second to be able to take a deeper dive into it, it actually raises up an even greater understanding and a greater appreciation for the complexity and the power of what Talmud really is all about. And so that's what I want to do. And it really comes from just a simple set of phrases or simple really phrase in the Gemara based off of the beginning of the Mishnah. This comes from Makot 17a. So the context is this: Matnitin, ha'ochel bikurim ad shelo kara alehem. In the case of a priest who eats first fruits before the one who brought the fruits to the temple recited over those fruits the Torah verses that he's obligated to recite. That refers, by the way, to Deuteronomy chapter 26, which we just read for the Passover Seder. It is, my father was a wandering Aramean, that you're supposed to bring these fruits to the temple. The person who brings them is supposed to say them, and then they're allowed to eat it, and the priest is allowed to eat it. But you can imagine, a priest is up there, he sees all these beautiful fruits, and they're about to recite the text, but the priest is like, I'm just going to take a little bit of a grape and just eat it. Right before the actual blessing is recited, that's a no-no. Harei ze loke arba'im. That this requires 40 lashes. And this is only one of the examples in the Mishnah that is on 17a of the different things that one is, if one does, that one is liable for 40 lashes. And that's kind of where a lot of the sugya is focused on. But the Gemara starts with a really fascinating quote because it doesn't actually seem to be necessary given the way that the Mishnah was designed, or the way the Mishnah was written, which it actually tries to figure out who said this particular phrase. Now, Elizabeth Shanks Alexander talks a lot in her work about how the Mishnah is not designed to inherently teach who said what. Rather, it's written in a what she called a casuistic style, a law book style of if something happens, then this is what occurs afterwards, which seems to be the context of the Mishnah. And therefore, it makes sense that you would have these anonymous statements that kind of present the law, present the idea, present the challenge that then we have to be able to resolve or build off of. And yet, the Gemara often likes to figure out who these statements are attributed to. And so it starts here in the Gemara. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana. With regard to the statement, Rabba bar bar Chana says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Zo divrei Rabbi Akiva stimta'a. That this is the statement of Rabbi Akiva, stimta'a. Now, there is a phrase in the word stimta'a, which is extremely important. We're going to come back to at the very end of our class, which is the word stam. One of the ways that you can refer to the anonymous editor of the Gemara is known as the stam or the stama de Gemara. Stam means like, it is. Like, how are you doing? Stam, it's fine. But it also can mean just an anonymous, someone who is not necessarily known, something that is not defined in any way. Because if you think of like the word fine, it's like, it's not here, not there. It's just something. So stam is the root of this phrase of stimta'a, which seems to be saying that Rabbi Akiva was the anonymous writer of this particular text. That's important, especially given the fact that the next statement seems to disagree with the notion that it comes from Rabbi Akiva. Velema zo divrei Rabbi Shimon stimta'a. But the Gemara suggests, and let Rabbi Yochanan say this statement in the Mishnah is the unattributed statement of Rabbi Shimon. So we have a debate, we have a machloket. Is this unattributed statement, is this anonymous statement going to Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Shimon? Okay, fine, we have a disagreement. But why is that so significant here? One of the reasons why it's so significant here, especially for the learning of Makot as we went through it, is that the next step of the Gemara is to bring the Breita, is to bring the text in which Rabbi Shimon seems to be making the argument that the statement of a priest who eats first fruits before the person bringing the fruits to the temple recites their blessing, that they are flogged for 40 lashes. In other words, they are bringing an actual text saying, no, we actually have something from Rabbi Shimon that says this. And the rest, and about 2 to 3 pages of Makot that we are in with from like Makot 17 through 20 actually goes through that Breita from Rabbi Shimon. So in other words, this opening statement, which seems to be kind of relatively innocuous, it doesn't really tell us that much. It actually is the lead in to the discussion in the Gemara about Rabbi Shimon's Breita, which forms the majority of the conversation. So that's a little bit about how the Gemara does its work. It starts with a point about who wrote it, and then in answering that point about who wrote it, it then leads into a larger discussion about what it is that that unattributed person had shared about this teaching, and then their other teaching, not the teaching from this Mishnah, but their other teaching becomes the focus of the Gemara. And it's just so fascinating about how the Mishnah can start in one place and the Gemara says, oh, from there, we're going to go to here and then have another discussion related to the topic, but about a whole different teaching brought by this anonymous writer. So that's one thing I think it's important to mention about why this is significant. But there's something else about it. And it has to do with the notion of transmission over the course of time, thinking about how there is a way, or not a way, but there is a process by which these statements are then added into the Gemara by virtue of it being quoted from later generations. So the person who wrote that statement that appears directly in the Gemara, the person who's quoted is Rabba Bar Bar Chana. He's an Amora of the third generation, which means much later on in terms of closer to when the Talmud was actually redacted. So therefore, you're probably going to get many quotes from those members of those generations, because when the Talmud was redacted, they were more contemporaries. Fascinating about Rabbi Bar Bar Chana is that one of the things that he is known for is mentioning the teachings of his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan, nearly 200 times in all of Talmud. So one of his jobs is to pass along the tradition that was received by him, or I should say that he received from his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan. He does that over nearly 200 times, including this one, because Rabbi Bar Chana is saying that Rabbi Yochanan was the one who transmitted this tradition, that it comes from Rabbi Akiva. But why does he actually think that it's Rabbi Akiva? Well, that's where you have to think about Rabbi Yochanan, who was a second generation Amora, right? Previous generation than Rabbi Bar Bar Chana, one of the most important teachers in the Talmud, one of the most often oft-cited teachers in the Talmud. He was the study partner of Reish Lakish. And interestingly, in Masechet Chulin 137, there is a hint. It doesn't really say it so directly, but there is a hint that one of his teachers is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was the one who edited the Mishnah. Now, if you notice, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is a Tana of the 5th generation, and Rabbi Yochanan is more of a 2nd generation. So you're talking about probably a teacher that he may have been in class when he was a very young student, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was a much older teacher, because there's a bit of a gap there. But if you think about the fact that some of my amazing teachers would have been like my grandparents' age. And in fact, actually, it was my grandfather, Zichrono Livracha, who was a teacher for me when I was very young, that there is a sense that you can have teachers who span a couple of different generations together. And because of the prolific nature of Rabbi Yochanan's teachings, it would make sense that even at a young age, he was viewed as a Talmid Chacham, as a very good student. And so he would be allowed to learn from one of the greatest teachers of their generation, of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi may be sort of the original source for a number of Rabbi Yochanan's teachings, especially as it pertains to Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the editor of the Mishnah, many of his teachers, like Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, among others, they were all disciples of Rabbi Akiva. And this comes back to one of the most important things related to the notion of how text is transmitted, especially when it's done through the name of Rabbi Akiva. This comes from a great book called Rabbi Akiva by one of my teachers at JTS, Barry Holtz. And this is what he has to say. Akiva has lived on as the hero figure of rabbinic Judaism in many ways. To begin with, we have his teachings, or to be more precise, we have the teachings attributed to him in our classic texts. Akiva's name appears more than 1,000 times in the Babylonian Talmud alone. Of course, we cannot with confidence say that every statement made in Rabbi Akiva's name was really spoken by him. The teachings of rabbis from the Tannaitic period are often quoted in later sources. Richard Kalman, who was one of my Talmud teachers at JTS, has put it well. During the course of transmission, many of these statements were, I don't know how I misspell that word, amended and completed in subtle or not so subtle ways, such that a statement's attribution to a Tannaitic rabbi cannot be accepted at face value. And that idea that you can't necessarily trust that this statement has been passed along correctly is here's just one little bit of an example of it, which comes from Bava Batra 145a, especially as it pertains to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, that statement was stated in my name by Rabbi Elazar, my disciple, but I never said that. I never said that statement. right? A teacher saying, my student got it wrong. They got it wrong. And how many times do we have in the Talmud, he said in their name? But what if they got it wrong? Is there any meaning to that? Is there any significance to that? And so I want to come back then to the significance, especially of attributing something to Rabbi Akiva and the role that he played, as Rabbi Holtz was sort of mentioning, as holding up. But that idea of Rabbi Akiva's significance to the whole project of rabbinic Judaism, and especially of the Talmud, is so important. This comes from a teaching from Avot de Rabbi Natan, which is a collection of midrashic teachings related to much of rabbinic literature. Rabbi Akiva, who died in 135, was like a worker who took his basket and went outside. He found wheat and put it in. He found barley and put it in. He found spelt and put it in. He found lentils and put them in. When he came into his house, he set aside the wheat by itself, the barley by itself, the beans by themselves. Rabbi Akiva did likewise and made the whole Torah into separate wings. And this is a quote from Back to the Sources, also written by Barry Holtz, that kind of gives you an understanding of the larger enterprise of rabbinic Judaism. Akiva is credited with initiating a process in which numerous miscellaneous fragments of transmitted lore were organized and collected under subject headings, rings of various kinds. So who knows? Maybe Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, while he did the job of actually putting things into their place, it's because it all started with Rabbi Akiva, or at least that's the idea, that he got it going. So the fact that there was an attribution to Rabbi Akiva in an anonymous way, that means that sorry, we'll lost for a second here. That means that by virtue of attributing to Rabbi Akiva, what they're saying here is that this statement is a part of how the Talmud really came to be here. And almost like we say sometimes, Zehalacha Moshe Sinai, it comes from Moses of Sinai, at Har Sinai. When we don't necessarily know where it comes from, it's almost like if we know it comes from a rabbi, but we don't necessarily know exactly who it was, we say it comes from Rabbi Akiva. We say that it comes from him. Now, I want to share, just very briefly though, that if you were to take this idea of the fact that all these attributions are given to Rabbi Akiva, well then what about the fact that the text that we have in front of us actually attributes it to Rabbi Shimon? Does that teach us anything? Well, guess what? Rabbi Shimon was one of Rabbi Akiva's students. So it's almost like even though it may not have been Rabbi Akiva who said this, it was one of his students. And therefore, we sometimes attribute it to Rabbi Akiva. But that's also about the unique relationship between students and teachers. How much do students have their own views compared to the views of what their teachers had passed along to them? Thinking about your own learning, how much of your own learning is done by this is what I learned from my teacher, so-and-so? Or is it that you take what your teacher said and then you integrate it into your own understanding and then offer that as a teaching? Very much we can see a dynamic of teachers and students. Sometimes they differ from one another, but there's a certain kind of relationship, especially from the Gemara, in which there is a desire to lift up the teachers who taught us. And by virtue of lifting them up, we're also then being able to lift up our own voices. So that even when Rabbi Shimon is talking in his own unique way, he's still lifting up the voice of Rabbi Akiva, who helped give us this incredible source that we have, this incredible resource that we have of Talmud today.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I think one of the hard parts about studying Talmud is there are so many names, and to us, they are just, if you're just getting into it, there are just so many names, and keeping track of these folks and who's in which generation and what their relationships to each other, especially since the Talmud often puts people in disparate generations as if they're having a little chat with each other.
I know.
Right. So this can be very, very hard, but Rabbi Akiva is definitely a wonderful place to start, arguably the founder of true rabbinic Judaism. So
Yeah.
if there's one figure to focus on, he's a great place to
I
start.
mean, it also just think about for a moment the relationship between Moshe and Akiva. There's the midrash that Moshe was receiving the Torah at Har Sinai and was told to write the little different jots and tittles, the little kind of crowns on the Torah. And Moshe was like, God, what does this actually mean? And God said, well, there will be a rabbi who will be able to come up with a teaching that comes from it. And Moshe was like, I would love to see that. Whisks him away, kind of a back to the future sort of mode, sits in the back of Rabbi Akiva's classroom, who is explaining the jots and tittles. And then when a student asks Rabbi Akiva, how do we know this? Rabbi Akiva doesn't say it comes from me. Rabbi Akiva doesn't say that this is something that I just made up. He says that this is a teaching of halacha mi Moshe, sorry, halacha Moshe mi Sinai. I always get that phrase
The
mixed
Moshe,
up a little
probably,
bit.
right?
Right. That it comes from Moses at Sinai. And Moses then sit in the back of the class and be like, oh my God, here's a student who is teaching something from my lips that I didn't even know that I had. Like that's an incredible way of thinking about students and teachers. It's that by virtue of the students interpreting with their teachers in mind, even if it's different than what the teachers had said, it's as if the teaching of those teachers continues to live on.
Yes. That is an amazing story. We haven't gotten to it yet.
Fair
In Daf
enough.
Yomi. It's in the Nachot. I dropped the reference to it in the, and if you go read it, you'll see it has an actually rather tragic ending too. That as rabbinic stories often
True.
don't always like to end there. So thank you to you, Rabbi Sachs, for being our teacher today, and to all of you for your great questions. Rabbi Sachs, I hope you get a chance to read the appreciation in the comments before I close out the chat.
Sure.
Happy Yom HaAtzmaut, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom. And we will see you in your inbox tomorrow morning, and hopefully Monday at noon for the Siyum. I put that material, that link into the chat as well. But if you didn't have a chance to grab it, you can also watch your daily newsletter for it. It will be there as well. And as always, a pleasure to learn with all of you. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Bye.